There we go.
Hello everyone. I am Hilary Young. I am really excited to be nerding out on my favorite subject with you today, which is branding and strategic storytelling. And I have a presentation for you. Let me move this stuff out of the way. All the Zoom stuff. Okay. So I think, there we go. So I think, the first thing, like branding 101, like who are you and why should I care about what you're selling, what you're talking about? And I should probably start by laying that out for me, because why should you commit the next hour of your time listening to me drone on and on about branding? Why should you trust what I have to say? So a big part of it is my experience at this point. You can't really see my grades, but they're there. I have 20 years of work experience under my belt. I started my career working in television production. I actually started out as a journalism major. I thought I wanted to work in the news, so I worked for ABC News 2020 for about 9 months, and then made the shift into fake news. I ended up at The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, was my first job, my first official job out of college. I was Stephen Colbert's assistant, where I had the opportunity to watch a show, a brand, get built from the ground up. And that was really my first foray into the world of branding, even if I didn't at the time realize what was happening. After working at the Colbert Report, I went on to work for HBO comedy series. I worked on MTV shows, some VH1 specials. I produced a video series for ESPN, the magazine. And one of my last jobs in television was actually at collegehumor.com, which at the time was way ahead of the curve. They were making viral videos. That was their whole thing. There's a lot of bro humor, college humor. But I was their producer in charge of all of their sponsored content, which again, I'm aging myself here, this was 2008, so this was long before Instagram and long before influencers, and really where I cut my teeth on figuring out what is a brand, how do we merge a brand like Axe body spray with an existing brand like College Humor and make sure that both brands are really happy with the finished product. I ended up moving to Philadelphia to be with my now husband, and hi, other people are joining us. Take a seat. We're just getting started. Hi.
Oh, great. Hi.
I was just explaining my background and what I bring to the table when it comes to branding. So I have the first part of my career I spent working in television, and then the second part of my career, which was based here in Philadelphia, I started as the director of content for Q Interactive, which was a startup based out in Broomall, and then went on to become the communications manager for Medical Guardian, which at the time was a startup here in Center City and now is a booming business. I think they have over 300 employees at this point. And from there, I went on to start my own consultancy after having my first baby in 2015. I really wanted more control over my life and my time and, more work-life balance. And that's when Hilary Young Creative was born. And I now serve businesses of all sizes, from startups up through enterprise-level businesses, really helping them figure out who they are as a brand. I help them navigate a lot of rebrands. I do content strategy and really come from a very strategic storytelling perspective in all the work that I do with my clients. So I'll start by, I love that I have people in the room here with me, so I'll start by opening it up to the group. What do you think branding is? Like when you hear branding, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. If you're online, you can also jump in here. Feel free to unmute yourself and let me know what you think branding is. But what do you think about when you hear branding?
The classic response is, here's who I am and here's what I stand for. Probably much more than that, but off the top of my head.
That's a very good response.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? You're nodding your head, you agree?
I agree fully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would tell you that most people, maybe not most, I think a lot of people now are really starting to understand what is at the core of branding and what branding is. I would say for years there was this misconception. Oh, sorry. Oh. Cardi B says no, no, no. Branding is not a logo, a color scheme, a website, or a business card. These are pieces of your brand identity, and they are tied to your bigger brand, but they are not what your brand is.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Since we're being interactive. So Jeff Bezos, more recently, I'm sure you've heard, he says a brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Oh, I might have that quote later on in this
Sorry,
presentation.
I didn't mean, I'm a little torn by that, because I don't want to get ahead of, if you're going to talk about that, we can table that, but.
We will get into it. On a tangent a little bit, I would say that that's probably the most common quote that comes up when you are thinking about branding. I would really say that branding is, like, the goal of branding is for you to control the messaging, right? Like, that's also what the point is when you're talking about consistency, you know, which is something I also get into, is that people have this misconception that consistency when it comes to branding, when it comes to content, means, like, you have to be posting every day, you have to be out there. Consistency is really more about consistency in your messaging, consistency in what you're putting out there. And that does kind of support what he's saying, that if you're consistent in your messaging, then what people are saying about you when you're not in the room will mirror those messages that you're putting out. When there's brand inconsistency and those things are not in alignment, that's really when, you know, if they're talking about you behind your back in a way that you are not able to control the message, that's when you really have to stop and get a little more strategic about what you're doing and what you're saying and how you're saying it. But we'll go right into it. Building a business is not enough. That really, in today's world, it's great that you have a product or service to sell, but without a brand, without a clear brand identity and, you know, a way to inspire and connect with customers and create community, there's no meaningful way to keep them coming back to your business and to keep spending money with you, and ultimately to make them evangelists for your business and help you do your own marketing work, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal for any business, is to have your audience do the work for you. So you have to build a brand in order to successfully grow. So here are some really interesting stats that I just wanted to share with you. Presenting a brand consistently across all platforms can increase revenue by up to 23%. 89% of shoppers stay loyal to brands that share their values, which I think is increasingly something I have been seeing on the data side, just that in today's climate, values are very important to consumers. And 13% of consumers would pay between 31 and 50% more, which is crazy, for your products or services if they were under the impression that your business is making a positive impact on the world. And that's really where mission-driven branding and mission-driven marketing comes into play. So next up, we get to the Jeff Bezos quote. So branding is a feeling that...
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
You asked the question.
It was a nice little teaser. You knew it was coming, you just didn't know where. It's really right here at the beginning. So branding is a feeling that people get when they think about your business. Your brand is what other people say when you're not in the room. That's attributed to Jeff Bezos. He was in the news a lot these last few weeks, so I think there's a lot of, I don't know that we should be listening to him on branding, because I do think he, as a company, Amazon sends out a lot of messages and right now is not doing the best job controlling what people are saying when they're not in the room. But again, I do think that having control of the messaging, like the underlying theme of what he's saying, is controlling the messaging and really having that be driven from the brand rather than being driven by the media or the consumers or your online reputation, which really, it should all be leading to the same conclusion. So branding also helps consumers figure out what makes your business worth buying from. Seth Godin, who is also a wonderful marketing guru, this is a quote attributed to him, which is that a brand is a set of expectations, memories, stories, and relationships that taken together account for a consumer's decision to choose one product or service over another. And again, this is where we talked about evangelism. Branding can turn people into evangelists for your business. If people believe they share values with a company, they will stay loyal to the brand. That's Howard Schultz, who was the founder of Starbucks. Now, okay, great. I've shared these insights with you, these quotes, wonderful. How do we apply this knowledge about branding to your businesses? The first is understanding what is really at the core of a brand, the foundations of a brand. The way I explain it to a lot of my clients is that the foundation of your brand, you have to think about it as if you're building a house. You cannot build a house without a solid foundation. Otherwise, you're building a house of cards that at the first sign of crisis or the first sign of change or, anything really, it could blow the whole thing right over. So really having a solid understanding of who you are, who you're serving, why you're doing what you're doing, and then figuring out the messaging in order to leverage that in the marketplace is the key to building a successful brand. So the main proponents, and there's other pieces of a brand, but I would say the three main pieces of the foundation of your brand is a mission statement, which is a formal summary of the goals and values of your business that serves as a compass for all of your brand decision making. So really, it's what's guiding you. It's your guiding light through everything. And this is beyond just how you approach your marketing. Your mission, again, at the core of your brand, because this is another thing that I don't think is talked about enough when people talk about branding. Your internal branding, so how your employees are understanding your brand. If you are putting out to the world that you are this wonderful brand and you're innovative and you're progressive and you're not kind to your employees, or you have a toxic work culture, or you're what?
Ellen.
Right? Like that was not on brand for her.
Shocking when I.
Exactly.
Such a, what do they call it? Cognitive
dissonance. Yeah, and that was enough to end it, right? When what is happening internally also does not match up to what you're building as a brand, eventually that's going to come back to bite you in the ass. There are no children joining us today. So the second piece is your value proposition, which is your unique business offering, or in other words, why people should spend money with you versus your competition. This is, at the heart of it, not really about you at all. This should be about your consumers and what problem that you are solving for your consumers, which also really leads into a brand story, which is not an about. This is not an about us page. A brand story is really a story that is less about you as a brand and more about the consumer and what they will get out of engaging with your brand. So the brand story is I'm identifying your problems, I am telling you how I can create some sort of solution for you, and now I'm showing you that I am the best choice for that solution, probably because of our mission and all of these other components of the brand that all feed into one another. So I wanted to talk a little bit, to me, about brands that stand out from the crowd, especially in their field. I know that Ben & Jerry's is getting some heat right now, but I love Ben & Jerry's. I think they're just an amazing brand. They're actually a B Corporation, and since their inception, they have really just stood for something well beyond ice cream. And they also have this really fun sorry, getting over a cold. Not COVID, it's cold. They have this really fun, playful approach to ice cream. I mean, you look at Haagen-Dazs, right? Haagen-Dazs is like very serious. They have this German name. Their flavors are very serious. They're expensive. Ben & Jerry's has a totally different approach to branding and in their mission as well, that it also goes back to that stat that supports if your consumers believe in your values as a company, they will spend their money with you versus your competitor. I also happen to be loving Nike right now, not only because I love Air Jordans, big sneaker fan, but I also really love how they're leaning into the social justice movement. I love that they embraced Colin Kaepernick. I love how they've embraced Serena Williams. They're really kind of now starting to put their money where their mouth is and support these bigger, larger causes, even if it's not popular and people start like burning their old sneakers on Twitter. They're standing by what they believe in, and also they're Nike, so it's kind of hard to ever really go against Nike. And then Peloton, which I happen to become, I'm a personal fan of Peloton after this pandemic. I think Peloton saved my sanity. But and we'll talk about this as we move into it a little bit more, I was so put off by Peloton, and I thought they only really were marketing to like rich people, and when they had that commercial that really missed the mark and was kind of tone deaf, I was like, oh, what are they doing? And then they learned from it, and they changed their price point, and they listened to their consumers, and they launched a totally different service. They launched an entire fitness service, a subscription service that you don't need the bike for, to help just encourage people to move their bodies and make it about more than just having the means to have this expensive bike in your house. And I think the way that they turned around, I don't know the exact stat, but they grew their business over 128% beyond what their projections were in the last year. And I do think the pandemic helped, but they've also, their CMO is fabulous, and the stories they're telling are really great. And more on that.
And they've overcome some tremendous adversity too, which is part of marshaling your brand too.
Yep.
So,
and then like the treadmill recall. There have been a lot of missteps for them, but they've handled it really well, and they talk about, when we get to it, we'll talk about that is an evangelist community. Anyone who has a Peloton loves their Peloton, loves the Peloton classes, they have instructors that they love. Really, they have created cheerleaders out of their audience to a point where their marketing spend is so much lower than it would be because everyone is so into their Peloton experience. We're going to kind of look at each of these. I know I gave a little bit of an overview, but I want to look at each of these brands a little bit deeper to talk about how branding has helped get them to the level of success where they are today. So Ben & Jerry's has a worldwide presence and generates roughly $240 million annually, which is, for ice cream, pretty impressive. Their brand story is really since 1985. Ben & Jerry have made it a point to give back through their Ben & Jerry's Foundation, which initially aimed to fund community projects in Vermont. And that has just snowballed over the years. They target people between the ages of 5 and 35, which I thought was interesting because I don't know that 5-year-olds really have purchasing power, but they're again,
influencers, right?
Exactly, and it's really fun. They have such a fun brand, and their flavors are really interesting and unique. And I think, especially any music fans or pop culture fans, the parents would love. Exactly, and I happened to be working at the Colbert Report when Stephen Colbert got his flavor, American Dream. So it was also really fun to see how that was marketed and have a little insight into the team. And it's just awesome. It's a really good group of people, and they really pride themselves on that, on the internal culture, and they're hiring the right people just as much as what they're putting out into the world. You know, and again, the ice cream itself isn't explicitly linked to social or environmental causes, but they have a deep commitment to making an impact along with innovative creative. So Ben & Jerry's really intertwines purpose into its brand. You know, and I think part of where I think they really succeed, and something I've also been talking to a lot of my clients about over the last year and a half, is that it's not right for every brand to get involved in every political conversation, right? Like, that can actually be pretty dangerous for some brands. And I think the best example I can give is Pepsi. When Pepsi did that commercial, I want to say it was in 2017 with Kendall Jenner, like, with the protest. It was just so tone deaf and, like, missed the mark so much and was very embarrassing for them as a brand, that you really have to say, like, Pepsi, like, you could sit this one out. Like, your thing is not really, like, fighting for your rights. That's not what you've been about as a brand. Whereas, you know, when George Floyd was murdered and Ben & Jerry's came out, obviously in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and criminal justice reform, this wasn't new for them. This wasn't a dangerous place for them to, like, dip their toe in those waters, because this is something they've been talking about and advocating for years. So when that kind of stuff happens, yes, it makes sense for Ben & Jerry's to do it. Doesn't make sense for Pepsi to do it. And I think it shows you, it doesn't matter how big your company is, if you're not having these kinds of internal discussions about, like, is this on brand? Do we have to do it just because it's trending right now, or is it something that we should steer clear of, is really something that I hope more brands will learn from in the future. So again, Nike, I thought it was, I didn't even tell you what, so the Ben & Jerry's mission statement is, we believe that ice cream can change the world. So again, that's leading, you know, it's where those two things intertwine, ice cream and, you know, purpose. So Nike, their mission statement right now, which I think they're constantly evolving, their mission statement is bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete around the world. And they have a little asterisk that says, if you have a body, you are an athlete. And it's really interesting because you can see the shift in the way they've been marketing over the last few years, that it's not just about athletes, you know, on the court or on the field. It's about the chubby kid making it down the block. It's about a new mom lacing up her shoes and going out and making time for herself. It's about, you know, amateur athletes like all of us who like to move our bodies, whether we do it at, you know, at a level that Serena Williams does it or not, which most of us are probably not achieving that. Nike is making it a point to let us know that that's what they're about and that's what they're here for. Nike sells their products in 170 countries and have more than a dozen brands that serve more than 30 major sports and consumer lifestyles. It has a brand value of $34.8 billion worldwide. Their current brand story is that Nike uses storytelling to allow their audience to dream, to believe they can complete the impossible, and to envision themselves as a hero. So the same way that, you know, Serena Williams is inspiring to people, that mom lacing up and having some time to herself after, you know, wherever it is, whenever it is, whatever time of day it's happening, is putting them front and center and making them the hero of their own story and making it relatable to everyone else who's seeing it. So their audience is professional athletes, female athletes, and youth athletes as the main demographics for this lifestyle brand. However, they also now aim to inspire these non-athletes as well. And you know, something I had mentioned before was going beyond sneakers, beyond athletic gear. Nike's engaged in a variety of community outreach initiatives, both in the U.S. and abroad. And in recent years, they've embraced the social justice movement, most notably by partnering with Colin Kaepernick, which I thought was a really bold move for them. And I think they still have a ways to go, but they're, you know, more recently, like when Sha'Carri Richardson wasn't able to go to the Olympics because she had tested positive for marijuana use, which is ridiculous, but everyone was talking like, will she lose her sponsorships? Will Nike drop her? And Nike was like, we are not dropping you. We stand by you. We support you. And again, that really demonstrates where they are as a brand right now and how they are approaching the world. And I think, again, as a consumer, you see this, you see them standing by people in hard times, and you're like, all right, like they're good. They're doing the right thing. And then the last brand I want to talk about is Peloton. Their mission statement right now is they're using technology and design to connect the world through fitness, empowering people to be the best versions of themselves anywhere, anytime. Again, Peloton exploded this last year, despite their stock took a nosedive after that commercial that came out around Christmas time 2019 that had, a seemingly wealthy, skinny woman being like, it's so hard to work out, which just seems so inauthentic, and they took a big hit for it, because who wants to see skinny people working out, right? I mean, it's my friend Fallon and I were just talking about this before. It's when you're struggling to really lose the baby weight or lose the pandemic pounds or whatever, that's when it's challenging, and you don't want to see skinny people on there. You want to see people who look like you doing it and getting it done. And they made a real about face over this last year. They brought in a new CMO, Dara Treseder, who I'm a big fan of, and I love her. And her whole focus has been telling customer stories and really focusing on having the bike in a messy living room, where there's also a child playing, or, getting on the bike on those days that you don't want to. They've really done a very good job at making the experience more relatable for their audience. They now have over 1.67 million Peloton subscribers worldwide, and the brand has been able to increase their revenue to $1.83 billion this past year. It's remarkable. Their brand story, Peloton was launched after years of struggling to get to the workout classes we loved while balancing our demanding jobs and busy families. Their bite-sized workouts now reflect that need for their audience. So, they have 10-minute classes, they have 15-minute classes, and their marketing, their advertising that they're putting out now is way more in line with their brand story, which is why I think people are connecting with it a lot more. Their target demographic has been, I'm just going to take a sip of water. Their target demographic has been the 35 to 65 age range. However, their fastest growing audience segment is now under the age of 35, which I found really interesting. Beyond the bike, after experiencing the brand blowback from a tone-deaf commercial that ran in 2019, the people spoke and Peloton listened. They've since shifted gears to lower their prices and actually make exercise more accessible for their audience. We've created an opportunity for people to discover the best versions of themselves through the power of sweat. So, there are other brands that we could have talked about today. These happen to be the three that were top of mind for me. But why? What is it about these brands that makes them special? What is it about them that makes them worth talking about? And what are the lessons that we can learn from what they've done? None of them are telling stories about themselves or their products. They all have bigger goals that align with their consumers' values. They stand for something or are solving problems for people outside of simply selling their products. And they are able to establish an emotional connection with their audience. You got the picture?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So this is an example of how the right messaging can give your business a leg up against the competition. So Bazoma St. John, who's now the CMO at Netflix and also one of my favorite marketers, she has said that it's important for people to understand how you feel as a brand. It's not about the facts and figures, even though at the end of the day, it really is. Point is, you want to tell the story from a point of emotion. So I think that's the hardest thing for brands to tap into. I don't totally know why, but it is very challenging, I think also because marketing in general has been so data-driven and so data-focused for so many years that it's so easy to lose sight of who you are talking to and what you need to say to them to actually make a human connection outside of who they are as a statistic or a number. So the data behind brand feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Building a foundation for your brand before you dive into your marketing efforts will allow you to make an emotional appeal to your audience with all of your communications. This is valuable because 64% of women and 68% of men have felt an emotional connection with a brand. 39% of consumers would start using a brand if it offered full product transparency, which is brand honesty. And 86% of consumers prefer an authentic and honest brand personality on social networks.
So a question, just real quick on that.
Sure. On the last
point,
mm-hmm.
For 39% of consumers would start using brands that offered full product transparency. That's their self-report, but does that actually bear out in the market, that when you see transparency, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, that people do respond positively?
Well, I think it's more of taking ownership, and I feel like what I've realized lately is that like inspiring life advice is really masquerading as branding advice. So like you have to take ownership of your mistakes, and you have to take ownership of where you're maybe not succeeding. So let's use Peloton as an example, right? Like they made a big misstep. That was a big misstep, and like their stock took a huge nosedive as a result of that misstep. They weren't just like putting their fingers in their ears and pushing forward. They were like, all right, we're gonna listen. We're gonna own up to it. We're gonna improve it. We're gonna listen to what our criticism is, and we're gonna improve our product, and then we're gonna put something out there that will solve these additional problems or these additional concerns about our business. So I think...
Sorry, do you have a laptop charger? I just said it.
Oh, I do. Oh, yes.
I don't want us to lose this.
Oh.
I was like, what is that up there?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, to your point, just even they may not air every single dirty laundry, but that alone is so much more than most companies. Another great example is Reed Hastings with Netflix. Remember years ago, they raised their prices?
Yeah.
And there was such a massive backlash, and he quickly retreated and said, you know what, we made a mistake. It was a mistake, and their stock got crushed.
Yeah.
Like really, their stock I think went from like 300 to 100 or something like that. This is way back, and he's like, you know what? It was a really bad mistake. We're changing. We're going back to, and they recovered. To your point, yeah.
Because I think.
Because they were honest about it.
Right, and that's the thing too. Like it's also crisis communications, and I think that's something that if you're on Twitter, if you're on any time with Twitter, like. There are a lot of bad apologies out there, and there are a lot of inauthentic apologies out there, and there are a lot of, I don't know if you were following what happened with Rachel Hollis, but like she also exploded her brand because she was really inauthentic it was a non-apology. She was not apologetic about what she said, which further alienated everyone that she
Her brand was a lie, and her apology was a lie.
Exactly.
And it was like, storm.
Yeah. That's again when it's built on a house of cards. When because I think Instagram also makes it really easy to have a perfect polished version of what you're putting out there, and then what reality is not matching up. It'll eventually come out. It'll all eventually come out. So it's not enough to just be consumer-facing perfect. Brands are the same rules that people should abide by, like brands should abide by. If you make a mistake, own up to it, apologize, be sincere, be a better listener. I think that's really what they're saying when they're talking about transparency, is really owning it and owning up to it, and then listening and moving forward, which we'll kind of get into that, because there's also, when it comes to not so much with branding, but then with the strategic piece of it, especially with content strategy, there's a real trial and error that you have to be okay with, and we'll get to it. I'm getting too far ahead of myself. You guys are getting me very excited about this.
Thank you.
so moving into knowing your audience, this was, I would say, I mean, this kind of straddles content strategy and branding. This is probably one of the most important things you can invest in as a brand, is really, really, really understanding who your audience is. So brand messaging that resonates is messaging that connects with a specific target audience, and not understanding your audience is the equivalent of screaming into a void, because you're going to pay money for marketing and you're not saying the right things to the right people in the right places. So it's a waste of time and money and effort. If you don't know who you're talking to, it's really hard to read the room with your messaging. And I just listened to, because I love the How I Built This podcast, I just listened to Ben Chestnut, who is the co-founder of MailChimp. And I thought this was like the most brilliant thing. Their motto has become, "We got you because we get you." And I just thought that was so brilliant and so concise and such a perfect example of, yeah, we got you as a customer because we get you as a customer and we know exactly what you need. And just brilliant. It was a really good podcast. Highly recommend. So the way to build your audience in a real way, there's really 4 points to this. Ignore generational labels when talking about demographics. Identify their problems, challenges, and struggles. Always lead with empathy first, which I also think is a very big challenge for a lot of marketing departments. And get granular about your segmentation. So talking about building your audience in a real way, there was, I've been thinking this for a long time, and there was a fabulous op-ed, or I guess an opinion piece in the Washington Post, maybe just 2 weeks ago, from a sociologist at the University of Maryland, which is my alma mater, who, along with maybe almost like 200 other sociologists, are advocating for the Pew Research Center to just drop it with these, like, what's a millennial, what's an elder millennial, what are baby, but like, enough with all the generational labels, because increasingly they're meaningless, and they're trying to put so many people in a container that it doesn't make sense. Like, I would be now an elder millennial, but I would self-identify as Gen X. So if you market to me, I've also had clients be like, oh, this would be perfect for millennials. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean 25-year-olds who are like going out to bars and single and having fun and wearing like baggy mom jeans? Or are you talking about 38-year-olds who have 2 kids and are wearing, you know, their Air Jordans to drop their kids off at preschool? So, you know, how you're talking to those audiences is very different, even though we're part of the same generational label. And I think that's something that brands really need to move away from, because it does more harm than good. So what you can do is identify their problems, challenges, and struggles. So regardless of your age or your socioeconomic standing in life, it really won't matter as much if you have a similar problem. Like, someone who's going through a career change at, 28 and feeling lost might be experiencing the same kind of feelings as someone who's retiring and feeling lost. So, depending on what your service, your product, your business is, you really have to think about who your audience is and like what they're struggling with at the core of who they are. Also, always lead with empathy first. So really try to put yourself in their shoes. There was this great article written by Noah Fenn, who I actually grew up with and is now like the head of some digital something or other at Google. And he wrote this great article about, despite having access to all of this data and doing all this data-driven marketing and data is so important, without empathy, without like an emotion behind using your data to have emotional-driven content and messaging, everything is going to fall short of success. And then the other piece is get granular about your segmentation. So, no target audience is a monolith. This comes back to getting rid of those generational labels. You don't need to say, okay, I'm just marketing to, so one of my clients is in the senior space. It's not enough to just say we're marketing to baby boomers and, their adult children caregivers. We have to say, like, okay, we're marketing to baby boomers who are older and have that, are struggling with their chronic health issues, have this, have X, Y, Z. Oh, okay, but we're also marketing to younger baby boomers who are more active, and maybe this product would be better for them. Like, you can really break it down and get very granular with it. And some people say, create like a persona, so you can like create like an imaginary avatar of like who that segment would, embody. I like psychographic profiles better, where you're really just listing like the psychological motivations and needs, because I think that also helps you when you're crafting content. So the goal, what is the goal behind knowing your audience? Sending the right message to the right people in the right places at the right time. Once you know what your brand wants to say and who you want to say it to, you have to get strategic about where and how you're showing up. Consistency in your messaging across all channels is key. This is where our content strategy comes in. I feel like you guys can see like what all my favorite Netflix shows have been. This is Kimmy Schmidt. Oh, it's really good.
But she's great.
She is great. And there's a lot of old 30 Rock people, like Tina Fey shows up in Kimmy Schmidt, yeah.
Okay.
I also highly recommend.
Well, that's going on the list.
After this past year of the pandemic, I have a lot of Netflix suggestions.
She's had a hell of a career. I mean, what was that first series that she was in?
Ally McBeal.
Ally McBeal. I mean, what was that, 20-somewhat years ago?
Probably, maybe more, maybe like 25 years ago.
To be in comedy consistently in prime time for 25 years? Yeah, she's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she's very strategic about her career move.
Yeah, I think so.
This is where the exactly. This is where the strategy comes in.
See, we're talking about her when she's not in the room.
Yeah.
There you
I don't
go.
even know what her brand is. Quirky comedy. So there was really 4 steps to a solid strategy, and obviously, there are more nuances to crafting a strategy beyond this, but the basic concepts behind a content strategy, which really now people are just saying it's a brand strategy. It's really being rolled into branding. Identify larger goals, business goals. So don't ever just create content for the sake of creating content, or because you see your competitors doing it, or because you think you have to get content out there. Set goals that you want to achieve as a business. So brand awareness, growing your email list, increasing qualified leads by 10%. It will vary based on what your business is, but start by setting those goals. I usually say pick 2 or 3 goals that you want to achieve, and then you work backwards from there. So once you know what your goals are, you'll think about, okay, what are the pillars of content that I as a brand want to talk about? What do I want to be known for? What are the main themes? One of my clients loves it, they call them buckets. What are the main buckets that you're going to focus on? And everything that you do will fall into one of those buckets. I suggest finding between 5 to 7 buckets, pillars of content to focus on. Then you pick your channels. So, I mean, you can be everywhere now, but there's no need to be everywhere. You don't have to be everywhere. And I would say, especially if you're starting out with a strategy, if you haven't implemented a strategy, pick 4 channels, right? So 2 social media channels, email, and I include blog because I think a blog strategy has to be rolled into a content strategy. Then, maybe it makes sense, like not every pillar, not every topic would make sense to talk about on each channel. So then you identify channel-specific topics, buckets that you want to work, that you want to work on, you want to create content around that will, again, achieve those larger business goals. It's good to have this written down because you're like, oh, I have this great idea, but you know what? It doesn't really support getting me more qualified leads. Like it really won't satisfy that goal. All right, that's getting tabled. That's not something we're going to focus on right now. So having a written strategy really keeps you focused and moving towards this bigger goal of achieving success for your brand and growing your brand. And then step 4, which, you know, we were talking about a little bit earlier in the presentation, is you have to collect data and assess, okay? So once you implement this strategy, not everything you put out there is going to be a winner. And I've had a lot of conversations very recently with clients who are like, this didn't go viral, this got like 6 views, I'm going to take it down. And I said, no, don't take it down, because you also don't know what the long-term implications of having that out there are, right? Because again, maybe someone will find it in a year from now and love that piece of content, and they're going to make that purchase with you. So even if it's not happening immediately, if it yields some sort of larger success metric for you, you won't know that right away. You kind of have to keep it out there and slowly collect the data over time. There's some crazy statistic that, especially with B2B businesses, blog content doesn't peak for an SEO perspective for a little over 2 years into being on the internet. So, you know, that is something to consider, that not everyone is going to find you right away, and that there is this long-term, it requires patience and a willingness to really get granular about how you're collecting data and figuring out what works. So there are no failures as long as you're learning from each experience, especially on social media. Sometimes I'll post something at 10 a.m. on a Monday, and it's a total flop, all right? No one is paying attention. I'll post something at 3 p.m. on a Thursday, and it blows up. Okay, let me try it again. Instead of posting on a Monday, I'm going to play around with it, because, again, happening once isn't enough data to make it a rule for you. So there's a lot of trial and error in moving through it and really getting to a point where you can play a little bit, and then you should constantly be tweaking your strategy, right? So I call it the lather, rinse, repeat, and I'm not talking about soap or shampoo, but the idea behind this is you should reassess your strategy either quarterly or at least twice a year. I know it's not easy for every brand to do it quarterly, but at least twice a year, you should be checking in with your strategy, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and then tweaking accordingly based on the data that you're collecting. In some cases, you'll have achieved those goals. Maybe you got those leads up. Okay, that goal is coming off the list, and we're adding a new goal to the list. And now we're going to have to tweak our strategy a little bit to adjust to reach that other goal. So really the main things to remember when you're working on any strategy is don't engage in content marketing for your brand if you're afraid to fail. Trying new things will yield success, but trying too hard to be like other brands will not. So if you're just trying to tread water and do what's already been done, you're not going to see the kind of long-term growth that you're hoping to see. Understand that not everything goes viral, and sometimes you won't see the value of the long-term impact of content until years later, which that's probably the hardest for so many businesses to understand. And also keep making data-driven decisions that also feel right, and you'll hit the jackpot. So I'm going to end it here with another quote from Hilary Young, who's the founder of A Drink With. You create a credible brand by staying true to who you are. And that's my spiel on branding. I post about this kind of stuff all the time. This is basically exclusively what I post about on Instagram, is branding tips, content marketing tips. I would encourage you to follow me, and also if you have any questions or want to keep the conversation going, I'm everywhere. So you can find me, and I love talking about this. I can probably talk about this for another hour, but I think now I'll open it up to Q&A for anyone in the room or you guys on Zoom if you want to chime in with questions as well. Pick my brain.
Sure. You had thank you, that was really great.
Oh,
Appreciate
you're
it.
welcome. Thank you.
I think you were mentioning, I forget who said it, but somebody that you really respected was talking about getting the consumer or something like that, and forgetting.
Ben Chestnut from MailChimp. Yeah, he's
Right.
the co-founder of MailChimp.
So my 25-year-old daughter works with me on the company that I'm building right now, and I think we all know this implicitly, but we have to remind ourselves all the time, like, show, don't tell.
Yeah.
So if you're, I think what we all have to be reminded of is you can't say that, like, we get you. It's like a 23-year-old is gonna be like, dude, are you kidding me? Like,
That's so
just,
lame.
you either get me or you don't get me by showing what your brand and what your company's about.
Yeah. That is, I actually have said that to multiple clients, you have to show, not
Show, don't
tell.
tell, yeah.
Because in a lot of cases, clients bring me in because they've kind of made a mess out of a lot of their branding, and I have to come in to clean it up. And a big part of that is, all right, there's all these inconsistencies in the customer experience, because, I mean, really, that's a whole other piece of branding. It's every touch point that it's not just the content, it's not just the website, it's every single touch point that a consumer has with your business. If you have a sales team, it's how they're interacting with the sales team, it's how they're interacting with customer service, it's how your emails are executed after, chatting with someone on the phone, and what you're saying in the emails, and how your emails look and feel, and how the tone of your emails, the personality has to match across everything. So if customers are if there's a disconnect in what you're telling them and what you're showing them,
Or you're trying too hard.
or you're trying
Yeah.
too hard, what's gonna happen is then you're gonna have a lot of backpedaling with online reputation management, because you're gonna be left bad reviews, and then you're like, how do we overcome this? How do we overcome bad reviews? How do we get good reviews?
Because you don't even strike a chord with someone to even
Exactly.
want to make a bad review, right?
Although I would say people are more likely to leave a review when they are enraged about, or
Yeah.
upset about a bad experience than they are, than they are with liking you. I know when I like a company, I'll share it with friends versus going to a third party site at a Trustpilot and being like, oh, I love Peloton. I just, I would not do that. But if I had a terrible experience with Peloton, I'd be like, stay away from them. They're crazy. Don't get enmeshed with them, whatever. So, I think the goal is really to keep the whole experience, the whole customer experience, every customer touch point as buttoned up and close to those brand values as you possibly can, so that you're not, because again, people just think of this as what are we saying on the website? What are we saying on social media? Your brand is so far beyond that. Those are just top of funnel touch points. There are so many other pieces that your brand will impact a consumer, and that's definitely something to think about across the board.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I thought it was really insightful what you were talking about, because I remember that Pepsi commercial and just being like, what are you doing? And it's so out of left field. But I think there's also a sense that these companies are getting that there is a pressure to respond to things. So, when these protests are going on, I do feel like consumers what do you all think of this? And so how do you, because Pepsi has been established for a very long time, and so it's not necessarily their fault that they weren't, founded with the principles that are more relevant now, but what would you advise a company to, where is that balance between people want to know, because I feel like if they didn't, they'd be like, well, why aren't you making a statement? But how do you balance? Right, but then, how do you balance that? Well, I don't want to be fake and say, we're just not founded, on these principles.
That's a really good question. My personal recommendation is twofold. One, you don't have to craft a whole marketing campaign around it. You can have internal conversations about it and also say, this is what we stand for as a company. We are going to be we'd like to donate X amount of money to organizations that are socially progressive. We'd love to have, our employees weigh in on which organization, they could kind of run a contest internally and then write a whole press release about it, about what they're doing. And, that kind of press would probably be a better move than a tone-deaf advertisement that probably cost them a lot of money to make.
Oh, God.
I mean, Kendall Jenner alone probably cost them $1 million to stick, and I think they were going to run that at the Super Bowl, right? That was a Super Bowl ad.
Yeah.
Painful. That was terrible.
But to your point, it was even more so the execution. I mean, not a good idea in general,
Yeah.
to pick her, but like the execution of that commercial was so bad. It was so like fluffy and like upbeat, right, if I remember correctly, and it was just so many things
I mean,
wrong
it's
with it. But
First of all, she's a white person, and it's like, okay, this white person is gonna like go up to the armed police with like a soda and like solve, like save the world, and like world peace from Kendall and the Pepsi. I mean, it was just the whole thing was very tone deaf at the time. I would also say, because this is also a conversation I had with a client recently, people will pay attention to what you are doing and liking and commenting online without you actually saying it in your own post. So you can be sharing things, maybe in your stories, or you can be liking progressive posts, or you could be, commenting like, yeah, we support this movement. And then people will be like, oh, like Pepsi supports this, okay, cool. Without, again, that literally would be like $0 ad spend. It would take such little effort, but little by little, people are seeing you pop up online, and it's making that brand impression on them that like, oh, okay, like they stand for something. Their values are in line with mine. Like, this is cool. I'm also liking this post. And it also people might see you liking a post on Instagram and it's a way to have brand awareness. They might not know what your company is yet, but if they see that you've liked something and you're like, yeah, support a paid maternity policy for women, or like a paid parental leave policy for women, I'd be like, oh, I like this. Let me check out what this brand is about. And then I go visit their page, and I'm like, oh, I like this. I like what they're saying. I'm going to follow them. And then little by little, you don't know how long it will take to convert someone eventually to make a sale. But if they know that your values as a brand are in line with theirs as a consumer, you're in the door. You're getting your foot in the door with top of funnel marketing.
Awesome. Well, I will say, we are up on time. I can tell that you could keep going.
I know.
Yeah. Next time we'll start at 3 and just let it go till 7.
Oh boy, yeah.
But thank you so much. This was really wonderful. And thank you for coming in person and virtually. This was really great. So, thank you all so much.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop the share now.